Dorothy James had never known struggle. As the only child of Richard and Juliet James, she had grown up wrapped in luxury. Her father was one of the wealthiest real estate moguls in the country, owning multiple hotels, schools, and residential properties. Their mansion was a fortress of wealth, and their name carried power. While her friends worked multiple jobs to afford rent, Dorothy lived in comfort. She had never needed to hustle, never worried about money, never questioned whether she would inherit everything her father built. But wealth didn't make her untouchable. At 22, she was still living in the family home, enjoying the privileges of being Richard James's daughter. Her father's latest project, a 5-star luxury hotel called the Grand Haven, was nearing completion, and they had thrown a grand house party to celebrate. It was supposed to be a night of joy, a gathering of friends, business partners, and social elites. It became a night of horror. When the guests left and the mansion doors locked, a nightmare unfolded. The thieves had planned it for months. They weren't ordinary criminals. They were professionals. Serial killers with a taste for cruelty. They knew the security system, the blind spots, the exact moment when the house would be most vulnerable. Dorothy woke to the sound of shattering glass. Then came the gunshots. She barely had time to register what was happening before masked men stormed into her room. Hands grabbed her. A cloth covered her mouth. The world blurred. When she regained consciousness, everything was a nightmare. Her father was dead, shot in cold blood. Her mother lay on the floor, bleeding from a wound in her leg, unable to move. And Dorothy had endured something worse. The men had taken their time with her, used her, humiliated her. By morning, the mansion was silent except for the quiet sobs of a girl who would never be the same again. The police came. Reporters swarmed. The world knew Richard James was dead, but the real details, the horrors of what happened inside that house, never made the news. Dorothy's mother, Juliet, was a woman of faith. A woman who believed in justice but also feared the consequences of exposing the truth, because there was another secret buried in Richard James's empire, one that complicated everything. His real estate empire was linked to fraudulent investments. He had covered his tracks well, but if the police investigated too deeply, everything would unravel. Reporting the robbery and murder would open doors that Juliet wasn't ready to face. So they handled things privately. A team of private investigators was hired. The case was kept quiet. And Dorothy had to survive. When she discovered she was pregnant, she shattered all over again. Her mother told her to keep the baby. "This child will be a blessing," Juliet said, holding her daughter's trembling hands. "He is innocent, and God will heal you." Dorothy wanted to scream. She wanted to erase every trace of that night, to pretend it never happened. But in the end, she listened to her mother. And 9 months later, she gave birth to a son. A boy she loved, a boy she feared, because every time she looked at him, she saw the men who had destroyed her. Dorothy James died that night, at least the version of her that existed before. When her son turned 2, she made a decision. She couldn't live as Dorothy James anymore, couldn't bear the weight of the name. So she changed everything. She left the city, took a new identity, and started over somewhere no one would recognize her. Her name was now Elena Carter. A new woman, a new life. No one from her past knew where she went except for her mother. She bought a modest home in a new city, away from the memories that haunted her. She ran the James family business from afar, managing things quietly without revealing who she really was. For 4 years, she lived in isolation. No relationships, no new friends, no risks. She had learned to be invisible. Elena Carter, the woman Dorothy James became, was careful with everything. She never stayed in one place too long, never got too close to anyone. Her past was a shadow that followed her, whispering reminders of what she had lost. She worked quietly, managing her father's business from the background. Though the James empire still thrived, no one knew the real owner was a woman hiding behind a new identity. She hired intermediaries, lawyers, and financial managers, keeping her name out of any paperwork. If anyone looked into it, they would only find layers of faceless corporations. She told herself she was safe, that her past was buried, but no matter how much she tried to escape it, it was always there. Every night she locked her doors twice. Every morning she checked her surroundings before leaving the house. Crowds made her anxious. Unexpected noises made her jump. And worst of all, she still dreamed of them. The men in masks, the gunshots, her father's lifeless eyes staring at nothing. Some nights, she woke up gasping, drenched in sweat, her hands shaking as she reached for the light. For years, Elena had done everything in her power to keep life steady. Controlled, predictable, safe. She worked remotely, handling business affairs behind screens and phone calls. She never attended meetings in person, never showed her face in places where someone might recognize her. She had carved out a life where she could exist without being seen. And for the most part, it worked, except some nights, the weight of it all felt unbearable. One night, after putting Noah to bed, Elena finally allowed herself a rare moment of escape. She had spent the last few years moving through life cautiously, always keeping to herself, always looking over her shoulder. But that night, she decided to do something different. She had reconnected with an old friend, Samantha, someone from her university days. They weren't particularly close back then, but discovering that Samantha now lived in the same state felt like a small piece of familiarity in an otherwise isolated world. Samantha had insisted she come out for a drink, just a casual night out, nothing too wild. "You can't just keep working and hiding away, Elena," Samantha had teased. "One night won't kill you." So, for the first time in years, Elena stepped out of her carefully guarded routine. She dressed in a simple black dress, tied her hair up, and took a taxi to the bar Samantha had chosen. It wasn't a crowded club or a flashy hotspot, just a quiet, cozy place with soft music and dim lighting. The kind of place where people could talk without yelling over loudspeakers. When she arrived, Samantha was already waiting for her at a booth near the back. "There she is," Samantha grinned, waving her over. "You look great." Elena smiled, sliding into the seat. "Thanks. It's been a while since I've done this." "Well, tonight we're just two friends catching up. No stress, no drama." Samantha raised her glass in a toast. "To normal nights." Elena clinked her glass against Samantha's and took a sip. For the first time in years, she let herself relax. And then she saw him. Victor. He was sitting at the bar, his back partially turned toward her, talking to the bartender. He wasn't someone she knew, but there was something about him. The way he carried himself, the way his presence filled the space without demanding attention. He looked composed, a man who had seen life's rough edges but didn't let them define him. Elena didn't realize she was staring until Samantha followed her gaze. "You checking someone out?" Samantha teased, nudging her playfully. Elena blinked and shook her head. "No, just lost in thought." Samantha smirked. "Uh-huh. Sure." Elena looked away, taking another sip of her drink. But for some reason, her eyes kept drifting back to Victor. The conversation between Elena and Samantha flowed easily, a welcome distraction from the usual weight of her thoughts. They talked about everything: work, life, the little things that made up their everyday routines. Samantha had moved to the city a year ago and was working in marketing for a tech company. "It's a good job, but honestly, I miss the excitement of our university days," she admitted, swirling her drink. Back then, everything felt possible. Elena nodded, though her past felt like another lifetime. Yeah, things were different back then. As they talked, Elena's gaze wandered again, just for a second, back to the man at the bar. This time, he was looking in her direction. Not in an intrusive way, but like he had noticed her, just as she had noticed him. He was tall, well-built, with dark hair that was neatly styled. There was a sharpness to his features, but not in a harsh way. More like someone who had seen things, lived through things, yet still carried himself with a quiet confidence. Samantha caught the look again and smirked. "Okay, now I know you're looking at something interesting." Elena exhaled, shaking her head. "It's nothing." But Samantha wasn't buying it. Right, because nothing Just so happens to be a very attractive guy sitting at the bar. Elena rolled her eyes, but before she could say anything, Samantha raised a hand and called over the bartender. "Hey, can you send another drink to the guy at the bar?" "From my friend here." Elena's eyes widened. "Samantha, relax, it's just a drink." Samantha grinned. "Consider it my way of forcing you to have a little fun." Elena sighed, but there was no taking it back now. The bartender nodded, preparing the drink, and within minutes, the man received it. He glanced toward their booth, his gaze locking onto Elena's. Then, to her surprise, he stood up and walked over. "Looks like he wants to thank you in person," Samantha whispered, clearly amused. Elena kept her expression neutral as the man reached their table. Up close, he was even more striking. His dark brown eyes held a quiet intensity, and his presence carried an easy confidence. "Thanks for the drink," he said smoothly, looking at Elena. His voice was deep but calm, controlled. "I don't usually accept drinks from strangers, but I'll make an exception." Samantha nudged Elena under the table. "Well, aren't you going to introduce yourself?" Elena hesitated for only a second before responding. "Elena," she said, offering a small smile. He returned the smile. "Victor," he said, extending his hand. She shook it, and for the first time in a long while, she felt something unexpected, something unfamiliar. Elena returned home that night, feeling lighter than she had in a long time. Something about being out with Samantha, about meeting Victor, had reminded her of the person she used to be before her world fell apart. She wasn't sure if it was his easy smile, the way he spoke without forcing conversation, or how he hadn't pried into her life. It was refreshing, unfamiliar. The next morning, she went about her routine as usual, getting Noah ready, preparing breakfast, managing business calls from home. But her thoughts kept drifting back to the bar, to the warmth of laughter she hadn't experienced in years. She told herself it was nothing, just a night out. But then she ran into Victor again. It started as chance encounters, seeing him at the grocery store, at the cafe where she sometimes stopped for coffee, or even walking past the bookstore near her home. Each time, they exchanged greetings, brief smiles, small conversations that grew longer every time. Before she realized it, she had given him her number. At first, it was just casual texts. Then he started calling, and soon they were meeting up intentionally. Their first real meeting after that night was at a small coffee shop on a rainy afternoon. Noah was at preschool, and Elena had a rare moment to herself. Victor had texted her, asking if she wanted to grab coffee, and for some reason she said yes. They sat across from each other, stirring their drinks, neither in a rush to speak. It was comfortable in a way she hadn't expected. "So, what's your story?" Victor asked, leaning back in his chair. Elena hesitated. She had practiced lying for years, but something about his gaze made her want to tell the truth, just not the whole truth. "I have a son," she said simply. Victor didn't look surprised. "Yeah? What's he like?" She smiled, her heart warming at the thought of Noah. "He's 4, smart, stubborn, loves dinosaurs and spaghetti." Victor chuckled. "Sounds like a great kid." She nodded. "His father and I, it didn't work out. We were young. He left before Noah was born." The lie slipped out smoothly. Something she had told herself so many times that it almost felt real. Victor didn't press for details. He just nodded, accepting her words. "What about you?" she asked, changing the subject. He ran a hand through his hair, looking thoughtful. "I've had my fair share of mistakes." She arched a brow. "Mistakes?" He exhaled, tapping his fingers against the table. "I used to pickpocket. Nothing serious, just stupid choices when I was younger." He looked at her, gauging her reaction. "But that's in the past. I left that life behind. I won't judge you for your past," she finally said, "as long as it stays there." Victor smiled, looking relieved. "It does. After that day, things progressed naturally. They started meeting more often, sometimes just for coffee, other times for walks in the park where Noah would run ahead, laughing as Victor chased him. Noah adored him. And Elena, She was beginning to let herself feel something she hadn't in years. Victor never pushed. He didn't try to define their relationship too soon or force her into anything she wasn't ready for. But there was something about him that made her feel safe in a way she hadn't in a long time. One evening, as they sat on a park bench watching Noah play, Victor turned to her. "I like this," he said. She glanced at him. "What?" "This. Being with you, with Noah. I don't know where this is going, but I know I want to be around for as long as you'll let me." Eleanor swallowed hard. She had told herself she wouldn't let anyone in, that she wasn't capable of love anymore. But looking at Victor, she realized maybe she was. Their relationship grew over time, turning into something real, something she hadn't expected. Victor was there for her in ways no one else had been. He showed up, consistently, without hesitation. He helped her with Noah, took them on little weekend trips, brought her flowers. For 6 months, they built something steady, something strong. And then one evening, as they stood on her front porch after a quiet dinner together, Victor pulled a small velvet box from his pocket. "I know we haven't talked about this," he said, voice steady. "And I know you have your reasons to be careful. But I love you, Elena, and I love Noah like he's my own. I want to build a life with you, if you'll let me." Elena's heart pounded as he opened the box, revealing a simple but beautiful ring. For the first time in years, she felt something she never thought she'd feel again. Hope. She had spent so long running from the past. Maybe it was time to start running toward the future. The first few months of marriage were blissful. Elena adjusted to sharing her life with Victor, and Noah adored having a father figure. Victor was attentive, loving, and patient. He made Noah laugh, helped with bedtime stories, and treated Elena with care. For the first time in years, she felt safe, but the past has a way of creeping back when least expected. The next morning, Elena found a small package by the front door. There was no name, no return address, just a plain envelope with her name on it. Frowning, she picked it up and went inside. Elena hesitated before finally opening the USB drive. She inserted it into her laptop, her fingers tense against the keyboard. A single video file appeared on the screen. She clicked it. The footage was dimly lit, recorded in what looked like a warehouse. Several men stood around, adjusting their masks, checking their outfits. They talked among themselves, some laughing, some serious. It looked like they were preparing for something. Then, her blood ran cold. Victor stepped into the frame. Her stomach twisted as she watched him pull on a black mask, adjusting it in the mirror. The same kind of mask she remembered from that night. Her hands clamped over her mouth, a choked breath escaping. The screen blurred as tears filled her eyes. She shut the laptop, her pulse hammering. Victor. The man she had loved, the man she had trusted. He had been one of them. Eleanor's body trembled as she backed away from the laptop. Her mind screamed at her to deny what she had just seen, but the truth was right there on the screen. Victor. Her husband. The father of the child growing in her womb. He had been one of them. Her breathing came in sharp, ragged gasps. She had to get out. Now, she rushed to Noah's room, scooping him up from his bed. The little boy stirred, his sleepy voice barely a whisper. "Mummy?" She held him tighter. "Shh, baby, we're going on a trip." Her hands shook as she packed a small bag. Just the essentials: clothes, documents, cash. She didn't have time to think. If Victor found out she knew, she didn't know what he would do. With her heart pounding, she slipped out of the house, into the cold night air. The city was quiet, the streets mostly empty. She hailed a cab, glancing over her shoulder every few seconds, afraid Victor would appear out of nowhere. At the train station, she bought a ticket to another state, back to the only person she could trust, her mother. As the train pulled away from the platform, Elena sat by the window, clutching Noah close to her. She watched the city she had tried to build a new life in disappear into the distance. Tears burned her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. The journey to her mother's house felt endless, each second stretching unbearably long. She clutched her son tightly, her mind spinning with the truth she had uncovered. The man she had built a life with, the one she trusted, was part of the nightmare she had been running from. "Elena," Juliet gasped, worry etching deep lines into her face. "What happened?" But Elena couldn't speak. She collapsed onto the couch, sobbing. Noah clung to her, confused and scared. After a long silence, she finally whispered, "It was him, Mom. It was Victor." Juliet's eyes widened in horror. No, that's not possible." But when Elena opened the laptop and played the video, the truth was undeniable. The footage showed masked men adjusting their disguises, making sure their costumes fit. And there, in the middle of them, smiling, unbothered, was Victor. Juliet's hand flew to her mouth as tears streamed down her face. She felt the ground shift beneath her. "Oh my God," she choked out. "Oh my God." Without hesitation, she grabbed her phone and called Victor. "Come here now," she ordered, her voice unsteady but firm. Victor was already confused. He had arrived home earlier to find the house empty. No Elena. No Noah. And now, Juliet was calling him in a panic. He wasted no time, driving straight to her house. The moment he stepped inside, Elena was on him, slapping him across the face, chest, arms, anywhere she could reach. "You monster, you devil!" she screamed, her voice breaking with each word. Victor staggered back, raising his hands in defense. "Eleanor, what are you talking about?" She backed away from him, her whole body shaking. "Don't come near me," she whispered. Confused and panicked, Victor's gaze darted around the room until he saw the laptop. The screen was still open. His stomach dropped. Slowly, he walked over and pressed play. And then, he broke. His knees buckled, and he collapsed to the floor, sobbing. I swear, I didn't know it would happen like that. I was young, I was desperate. I never wanted this." Juliet's face twisted in rage and heartbreak. She kicked him away from her feet, disgusted. "You ruined everything," she spat. "You destroyed her life." The room was filled with the sound of crying. Elena's, Juliet's, even Victor's. But Elena didn't hesitate. She picked up her phone and dialed her private security. "Arrest him." Victor barely reacted when the officers stormed in and handcuffed him. He didn't fight. He didn't resist. He just wept. As they dragged him away, he turned to Elena one last time. "I love you. I swear, I love you." But she had no words left for him. Elena filed for divorce the next day. For the next 6 months, she went to therapy, confronting the wounds she'd buried for so long. Her mother, devastated by everything, checked herself into rehab, needing to heal from her own trauma. And Victor, he spent those same 6 months in prison, paying for the sins of his past. The life Elena had built was gone.